Do millions and millions of America admire or even know the name of the Emir of Qatar, of the Prime Minister of Qatar? Do millions and millions of Americans agree that the billions and billions of dollars that Qatar, along with communist China and Iran, have poured into our country to destroy our colleges and universities and now to destroy our K through 12 public schools and indoctrinate our children? Do millions and millions of Americans agree with that? Do millions and millions of Americans think it's great that hundreds and hundreds, if not soon thousands, of mosques are popping up out of nowhere, being funded by whom? And the most radical, terrorist-supporting imams and so-called scholars can now be found in many of our towns and cities, from Dearborn, Michigan, to Patterson, New Jersey, to Plano, Texas, to Tampa, Florida, and every place around and in between. Do millions and millions of Americans agree with that? You don't hear a word from Tucker Carlson about that. Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Liberty's Voice, the newest, I would argue, the best video podcast out there. Now, I missed you yesterday. It's supposed to be a lot of snow where I am, and, well, it turned out not to be a lot of snow, but the crew couldn't get here nonetheless. But here we are, and we are all ready to roll, baby. I'm glad you're here. You know, every American generation seems to have what I would call a traitor. Remember Benedict Arnold? There were others as well, Alger Hiss. And every generation seems to have a leading anti-Semite, David Duke, Spencer. So I want to talk a little bit about American history in the context of the potential coming war with Iran, recent events involving Tucker Carlson and his treatment of the commander-in-chief, his associations with enemy states, his attacks on our country, patriots in our country, our culture, our faiths, and his rabid anti-Semitism and anti-Christianity. So there is a historical context to all of this, and I think it's very, very important. First of all, what exactly is a traitor? A traitor. Well, there's many definitions, but most of them have a similar core definition, which is somebody who betrays a friend, a principle, or a country. Somebody who is disloyal to friends, to groups, to beliefs, and their country. And I believe that's Tucker Carlson. I truly do. And in some ways, he's worse than some of these people in the past, because he not only has stabbed the commander-in-chief, President Trump, in the back repeatedly, as he did in June before we launched our attack on the Islamo-Nazi Iranian regime's nuclear bases, but he has a history of stabbing the commander-in-chief in the back. He has a history of coddling up to our enemies, whether they're in Europe like Russia, the Middle East, and he has a history of trashing American patriots. He also has a history of lying, of twisting, leaking to a friendly media, dispiriting the American people, creating a divide, and in my view, undermining MAGA, the Republican Party, and ultimately the country. So let's get into this. History. Benedict Arnold. Who was Benedict Arnold? Well, actually, Benedict Arnold was a great general who fought in the Revolutionary War. Let's take a look at this from mountvernon.org. As a general in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, Benedict Arnold served with distinction in key battles, but he was passed over for promotion several times. He felt very aggrieved. Arnold was also investigated by the Continental Congress during his service and faced various accusations from opponents. Frustrated by the opposition, Arnold eventually started working for the British, even while continuing to serve in the Continental Army. Ultimately, his betrayal was discovered, and Arnold fled to New York City, accepting a commission in the British Army. Arnold's name has become synonymous with treasonous behavior and is perhaps one of the most infamous figures in American history. Traitor. I believe Tucker Carlson will be viewed as one of the great traitors in American history as time goes on and people look back. It's one man's opinion, my opinion, but I think it's shared by many. Benedict Arnold was born in 1741 to a prominent Connecticut family. Oh, prominent. Arnold lost most of his siblings to yellow fever, events that possibly triggered alcoholism in his father. As a teenager, Arnold's family faced financial hardship. At the age of 16, he enlisted in a militia and served in the 7 Years' War in upstate New York. During the 1760s, Arnold started a successful apothecary business, establishing himself as an influential person in New Haven, Connecticut. Through operating these businesses, he traveled throughout New England, Quebec, and in the Caribbean. He married Margaret Mansfield in 1767. Arnold's role as a prominent businessman brought him into direct conflict with both the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act, where the British government sought to regulate and tax colonial business transactions. Arnold joined the Sons of Liberty and continued his business in defiance of the British acts, effectively becoming a smuggler. His political involvement, previous military experience, and role as a smuggler propelled him to military leadership. He was elected to the position of captain in the Connecticut militia in 1775. He participated in the siege of Boston and advocated that the Army capture Fort Ticonderoga. While returning from the engagement, he learned of the death of his wife. Afterward, he resigned his militia commission and took a command in the Continental Army. As a proponent of the failed Quebec campaign, he held various commands related to its movements. In the fall of 1777, he fought the Battle of Saratoga, where he received a leg wound. In June of 1778, Washington gave him command of the city of Philadelphia upon the British withdrawal. The following year, he married Peggy Shippen, his second wife, and a member of a prominent Loyalist family in the city. Despite this service, Arnold was the focus of hostility from multiple officers in the Continental Army. Arnold brought complaints against Moses Hazen, which led to his court-martial. Afterwards, Hazen leveled countercharges. Joseph Reed, a former aide-de-camp of Washington, serving on the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, feuded with Arnold, criticizing his behavior as oppressive over the people of Philadelphia. He was difficult to get along with. Washington directed the matter before Congress. In January 1780, Arnold was cleared of serious charges concerning these matters, but the trial adversely affected his military career and reputation. However, Arnold also became involved in conflicts with both John Brown and James Easton, who he served with on the Quebec campaign. Brown, in response, published a pamphlet that claimed of Arnold, quote, "Money is this man's God, and to get enough of it, he would sacrifice his country," quote unquote. Arnold expressed disappointment and pessimism about the prospects of the United States, and evidence mounted that he was conspiring with the British by exchanging sensitive military information for money. Although cleared of a court-martial, Arnold was rebuked by Washington, who called his conduct imprudent and improper. It is possible these feuds and assaults on his republic tempted him to commit treason. After being passed over for promotion to Major General, Arnold attempted to resign his commission. Arnold resigned his post in Philadelphia and eventually gained command at West Point under the endorsement of Philip Schuyler. It was in this role that he entered into secret negotiations with the British. He transferred money to British forces and passed on information that would aid the British in capturing West Point. At the same time, he weakened the fort's defenses and thinned out its supplies to make it easier to do so. John Andre, the officer in charge of British intelligence in North America, was his contact. In late September of 1780, he was captured and ultimately executed for his role in the plot. Now, the documents in his possession when he was arrested implicated Benedict Arnold and revealed Arnold's betrayal. Before his execution, the Americans offered a prisoner exchange of Andre for Arnold, but it was refused by the British. Arnold narrowly avoided capture by the Americans and eventually fled to England with his family. Washington wrote of Arnold, "Treason of the blackest dye was yesterday discovered." He died and was buried in Britain. Arnold served in the British Army for the duration of the war, and he then engaged in business in Canada and England until his death in 1801. Since then, his name has become synonymous with moral failure, betrayal, sinister self-interest. His treason against the Continental Army and methods in which he used to so demonstrates the importance of espionage tactics in the American Revolution. Benedict Arnold. Our 250th anniversary, there were people undermining us. He wasn't the only one. He was prominent enough. When we were fighting our life and death war against the British, undermining us, serving the interests of the enemy at the end. Who else is undermining us right now? Who's been trying to undermine the president? Who attacked his ambassador? Who's attacking some of the most important and prominent members of Congress who are conservatives, who are loyalists to this country? Who is spending so much time in the Middle East, not in support of allies, I would argue, but in support of other regimes? Qatar, you might say. You might say, well, the President of the United States views Qatar as an ally. Now, that's very interesting. Let me say this at this point about that. He may and does, but he also considers Israel the most important ally in the Middle East, and he has said so. He's also the greatest supporter and defender of the State of Israel in American history, the history of the State of Israel since 1948. He's also best friends with the Prime Minister of Israel. He has also provided as many weapons and armaments as he can to the State of Israel, as Israel has been fighting a war on 7 fronts. He's also had our Navy there in June of last year to help defend Israel against missile attacks by their enemy and our enemy. So let us be clear. There is no tie between what Tucker Carlson is doing and what President Trump has been doing. Because Tucker Carlson has been undermining the State of Israel, smearing the Prime Minister of Israel, and far worse, as I'll get to in a moment. That's why it's my belief, under the textbook definition, that he is a traitor who's betraying our country, who's betraying people who used to support him, betraying the president, the Republican Party, and the Make America Great Again movement. That's my opinion, and I'm making the case, in my view. What about Tucker's anti-Semitism, which is obviously rampant and relentless? Father Charles Coughlin was a highly influential radio priest in the 1930s with an audience of millions. Became increasingly and openly anti-Semitic, particularly after 1938. He would have been a modern-day podcaster, wouldn't he? His rhetoric evolved from attacking international bankers to spreading conspiracy theories, justifying Nazi persecution, and alleging that Jewish people were responsible for communism and later the outbreak of World War II. From the Holocaust Encyclopedia, here's a breakdown of what Father Coughlin said about Jews. Bullet. Justified Nazi persecution, Kristallnacht. Following the state-sponsored anti-Jewish violence of Kristallnacht in 1938, Coughlin defended the Nazi regime. He argued the attacks were a justified defense mechanism, quote-unquote, against what he termed, quote, Jewish persecution of Christians, unquote. Bullet. Blamed Jews for communism. He called it Judeo-Bolshevism. Coughlin frequently promoted the conspiracy theory that communism was a Jewish creation. He claimed that the 1917 Russian Revolution was, quote, launched and fomented by distinctively Jewish influence, unquote, and blamed, quote, atheistic Jews and Gentiles, unquote, for the deaths of millions of Christians. Bullet used the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, his magazine, Social Justice, serialized the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a notorious anti-Semitic forgery that claimed to detail a Jewish plot for world domination. Bullet, alleged warmongering. During World War II, Coughlin claimed that, quote, international Jewish bankers, unquote, were responsible for initiating the war for their own benefit and conspired to involve the United States. Somewhat similar to what we hear from Carlson. Bullet targeted specific individuals. He attacked specific prominent Jewish figures, sort of like me today or Ben Shapiro and others. Josh Hammer, such as Bernard Baruch, and referred to modern Shylocks to promote stereotypes about Jewish control over finance and politics. Bullet demanded assimilation. Coughlin argued there was no Jewish question in America, only a question of communism, and the Jews were inviting persecution if they did not actively fight against communism. Bullitt, thin-skinned accusations. In a 1938 response to critics, he stated that Jews should not be so thin-skinned and argued that his criticisms were aimed only at unsocial Jews, not all Jewish people. And PBS noted Coughlin's anti-Semitic rhetoric grew so severe that he was dubbed the radio priest, and his supporters, many associated with the Christian Front, engaged in street violence against Jews. Due to his views and his opposition to the U.S. entering World War II, he was eventually forced off the air by the Catholic Church hierarchy in the U.S. government by 1942. A little bit more. Throughout the 1930s, Coughlin was one of the most influential men in the United States. He was a Catholic priest in the Metro Detroit area who became politically active, foreshadowing modern talk radio and televangelism, and I would argue podcasting. Coughlin led radio broadcasts that reached tens of millions of listeners. He broadcast religious services with political overtones and expressed anti-Semitic views. He also voiced pro-Nazi opinions that made him a person of interest for the U.S. FBI in 1942. He was born on October 25, 1891 in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He graduated from the University of Toronto in 1911. He then attended St. Basil's Seminary in Toronto. He was ordained as a Catholic priest in 1916. Coughlin's views as a priest were influenced by late 18th century Catholic teachings emphasizing conservative clerical activism. His views were also shaped by the Basilian order to which he belonged. Founded in France in the early 19th century, the Basilians studied medieval church doctrine in the context of fierce opposition to modern economic and church doctrine and social developments. Sounds familiar too to me. They believed the church should return to its theological roots. Among other issues, they called for the church to restore the prohibition against usury. Many Basilians regarded the practice of usury as a main source of the ills that afflicted modern society. Such views blended with anti-Semitism in Coughlin's broadcasts throughout his career. In 1930 broadcast, Coughlin attributed the current economic problems to those who profited from usury. He stated, "We have lived to see the day that modern Shylocks have grown fat and wealthy, praised and deified, because they have perpetuated the ancient crime of usury under the modern racket of statesmanship." From 1916 to 1923, Coughlin was on the faculty at Assumption College in Sandwich, now Windsor, Ontario, Canada. In October 1926, Coughlin broadcast his first radio address. By the time of 1929's stock market crash, Coughlin had a large, loyal audience. He had gained the reputation of a spokesperson for the common man. Sound familiar, America? In 1930, he launched a crusade against communism. His message drew upon his own fear and that of others that a communist influence was spreading in the United States. Of course, it was. Having become a U.S. citizen while in Detroit, Coughlin was an early and enthusiastic supporter of Franklin Roosevelt. Coughlin believed that only Roosevelt could pull the United States out of the Great Depression and protect the country from the perceived communist threat. The actual communist and fascist threat, I would say. Coughlin used his radio program, The Hour of Power, to persuade his followers to vote for Roosevelt in the 1932 presidential elections. Roosevelt was distrustful of Coughlin from the beginning and only wanted his endorsement to get help to get elected. Once president, Roosevelt appeared to ignore Coughlin's contribution to his successful bid for the presidency. He slowly distanced his administration from Coughlin's unpolished populism. Unpolished populism. Ding, 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 ding. Nevertheless, Roosevelt continued to use Coughlin's influence to help garner public support for the New Deal. Boy, there's a lot of similarities, I feel. Initially, Coughlin overestimated his importance to the administration. He used his radio program to support the New Deal and to attack those opposed to it. When he realized he was not going to play a key role in Roosevelt's cabinet, however, Coughlin felt betrayed. After several attempts to get the president to notice him, he turned on Roosevelt. By the end of 1935, Coughlin used his radio program to attack both Roosevelt and the New Deal. See, for a lot of these anti-Semites, it's about their own mental illnesses and deficiencies, their own egos, their own grifting. Throughout the 1930s, Coughlin was one of the most influential men in the United States. A new post office was constructed in Royal Oak just to process the letters that he received each week. Now, in 1935, Coughlin created the National Union of Social Justice as a political action group that would represent the interests of his listeners in Washington, D.C., forming his own political operation. Again, sound familiar? By the 1936 presidential election, it had more than 1 million paying members. In 1936, Coughlin founded a journal entitled Social Justice. The publication provided another venue to promote his populist ideology. The National Union for Social Justice tabled 16 principles as guidance for their program for the United States. Liberty of conscience and education, nationalization of resources too important to be held by individuals, abolition of the Federal Reserve, return to Congress the right to coin and regulate money, rights of workers to organize unions, requisition of wealth and conscription of men in times of war, and the principle that human rights should outweigh property rights. Coughlin was ahead of his time in splitting his ticket. He supported some issues associated with the left, such as federal support to prop up the dollar, and others with the right, such as America First foreign policy. Does that not sound familiar today? With Tucker Carlson, the left and the right, the crude populism. During the 1920s, Coughlin's anti-Semitic views were muted on air. After his split with Roosevelt and with the rise of the National Socialism and fascism in Europe, however, he attacked Jews explicitly in his broadcast. Some historians attribute this change to Coughlin taking advantage of rising anti-Semitism around the world in order to keep himself relevant. Based on his speeches, writings, and associations, however, he appears to have had significant anti-Semitic sentiment throughout his career. The days and weeks after Kristallnacht, Coughlin defended the state-sponsored violence of the Nazi regime, much like Hamas, and Hezbollah, and Iran, and of course Qatar. He argued that Kristallnacht was justified as retaliation for Jewish persecution of Christians. So Coughlin's trying to divide Jews from Christians, a relentless attempt to divide Jews from Christians. He also admonished loudly, constantly, Christians who wouldn't agree with him, Christians who were too friendly to the Jews. He explained to his listeners on November 20, 1938, that the communistic government of Russia, the Lenins and Trotskys, atheistic Jews and Gentiles, had murdered more than 20 million Christians and had stolen $40 billion of Christian property. For years, Coughlin publicly derided international bankers, a phrase that most of his listeners understood to mean Jewish bankers. Such anti-Semitic views were expressed on the pages of Social Justice. In a series of articles published in 1938, maybe he would have had a series of podcasts back then, Coughlin lambasted Jewish financiers and their control over world politics. These articles culminated with a story recounting his own version of the infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This anti-Semitic publication falsely purported to be minutes from meetings of Jewish leaders who were plotting to take over the world. You notice how Carlson has twisted everything that Huckabee said, tried to set up Huckabee, was using anti-Semitic tropes when he was questioning Huckabee. Then afterwards, they put out clips. The media, almost like a conga line, because he's a relentless leaker and spinner and propagandist, turned on Huckabee. We're going to the administration. What do you think about Huckabee saying that the Jews, that is Israel, have the right to conquer the entire Middle East, which he never said? And on and on and on about how he was treated when he came to Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, but they have a video showing that he was lying. As war approached, Coughlin's politics shifted further toward the right. And by the right, they try to throw all of us conservatives in the right. We're not on the right. We are constitutional conservatives. We are here. That's the spectrum. The spectrum is a circle with an opening at the top. The political spectrum that I've created in my own mind in my discussions with you folks. We are at the bottom. We are a constitutional republic. That's what we believe in. That is what we support. That is what we promote. That is what we talk about. then as you move this way, unfortunately for you, it's on the left. Let me do it this way. As you move this way, you work towards neo-fascism and fascism and National Socialism. And at the top, you have Marxism, communism, socialism, and so forth. So we're not of the right, which is what the left and the media try to say of us. We are constitutional conservatives who refuse to be called right-wing or left-wing. Let me go on. He associated with fascist leaders and known anti-Semitic thinkers in the Anglo-American world. Well, Carlson associates with anti-Semites in foreign governments who are seeking the destruction of the State of Israel, who are funding the Muslim Brotherhood, who are promoting that ideology in our United States with the massive migration of Islamists into our country, defending Sharia law, defending Islamism, trashing Christians, trashing Jews, trashing the Judeo-Christian value system, talking about the replacement theory that Christianity replaced Judaism rather than both being attached at the hip. And I could go on and on and on. And he does this day in and day out. And he does more than that. What does he do? He platforms Fuentes and Dave Smith and Darrell Cooper, all of these, in some cases, Jew haters, in some cases, Hitler aficionados, in some cases, Holocaust deniers. He's got a conga line of these people he brings in. What about Coughlin? Well, he became friendly with or associated with U.S. auto manufacturer Henry Ford, who was a well-known anti-Semite at the time. Dennis Fahey, professor at Holy Ghost Missionary College of Dublin, Ireland, supported the French fascist movement, which aimed to establish an anti-modern, authoritarian, and anti-Semitic regime in France. Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists. Hilaire Belloc, an Anglo-French novelist, poet, and debater whose book The Jews listed Jews as a distinct racial group that should never assimilate in Europe. And Ezra Pound, a U.S. poet who spouted anti-Semitic statements and developed an admiration of Italian fascist dictator Mussolini. Eventually, on May 1, 1942, Archbishop Edward Mooney, the new leader of the Catholic Church in Detroit, instructed Coughlin to cease all non-pastoral activities on pain of being defrocked. He continued, did Coughlin, to oversee the Shrine of the Little Flower until his retirement in 1966, and he died in 1979. To the extent people know who he is, his legacy is dirt. Dirt. Now, what about Tucker Carlson? He befriends, says he's interviewing Putin. In fact, the interview was so pathetic that even Putin was shocked at how pathetic it was. He's interviewed the president of Iran, just asking questions, mind you. But he didn't ask questions the way he attacked Senator Ted Cruz or Ambassador Mike Huckabee or others, did he? He coddles the Emir and Prime Minister of Qatar, one of the greatest funders of terrorism on the planet, including Hamas, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, billions of dollars into the United States to spread Islamic hate. He platformed Fuentes, gave him a wet kiss, multiple wet kisses. I talked about comic David Smith, who's a complete reprobate. Darrell Cooper, in my view, a complete fraud as he rewrites the history of the Holocaust and the Third Reich. And that's just some of it. He was awarded last year the Anti-Semite of the Year by the Stop Anti-Semitism group. He spreads agitprop, propaganda. He plants stories in friendly media. He attacks so-called Christian Zionists, who are traditional Christians, evangelical Christians who embrace Israel and the Jewish people because they embrace the entirety of the Bible. He has said of President Trump, he's the single most repulsive man on the planet, a wacko. He has said of President Trump just a few years back, I hate him passionately. He has said we're all pretending we've got a lot to show for it, meaning the Trump first term, because admitting what a disaster it's been is too tough to digest. Regarding the last 4 years, he said, but come on, there isn't really an upside to Trump, and I could go on and on. He's trying to destroy President Trump, and he's been trying to destroy President Trump. He's been trying to destroy his presidency. He's been trying to destroy the MAGA movement by claiming to be the MAGA movement. He's undermining the Jewish faith and attacking Jews. He's undermining the Christian faith and attacking Christians, cherry-picking absurd individuals who lie about the Christian faith. As I said, he's attacked viciously the ambassador to Israel, one of the great statesmen of our time, Mike Huckabee, ambassador, former governor, former pastor. Aish, A-I-S-H, Dr. Yvette Alt-Miller, put out a piece a few days ago. The popular podcaster is spreading malicious lies about the Jewish state and Jews worldwide. Tucker Carlson made headlines again after falsely claiming he was detained at Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport on February 18. As the story unraveled in the world's press, Carlson doubled down on his lies, smearing Israel as intolerant and dangerous. Carlson's fabrications about being detained in Israel are only the latest false accusations he has leveled at the Jewish state and the Jews around the world. Here are 4 lies that Carlson has spread about Jews in recent months. No, Tucker Carlson wasn't detained in Israel. On February 18, Carlson and several staff members flew to Ben Gurion International Airport in a private plane. Carlson and his business partner, Neil Patel, stepped outside long enough to pose for a photo, which Carlson posted on X with the caption, "Greetings from Israel," before the entire entourage went back inside. They were there solely to record an interview with U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, which Carlson insisted on conducting inside the terminal. Critics noted the irony. A man who spent so much time attacking Israel couldn't be bothered to actually see it. As criticism mounted, Carlson told Britain's Daily Mail that he and his staff were detained after the interview. Men who identified themselves as airport security took our passports, hauled our executive producer inside a side room, and then demanded to know what we spoke to Ambassador Huckabee about, he claimed. The story was quickly shown to be a fabrication. Israeli officials confirmed Carlson was never detained, and the room his producer was allegedly hauled into was a VIP lounge. I've been to that VIP lounge. They give you food, soda, juices, coffee. What do you need? Is there any way I can help you? That's the room they were hauled off into. Yeah, right. The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem concurred. Carlson's group received the same passport control questions that countless visitors to Israel, including Ambassador Huckabee and other diplomats, receive as part of normal entry and exit procedures. And despite being debunked, the accusations continue to circulate online, lending false credence to Carlson's portrayal of Israel as malevolent. No, Christians are not mistreated in Israel. February 4, Carlson broadcast an incendiary interview with Hassam Nuam, the Anglican Archbishop of Jerusalem and a known Hamas apologist. Now, he knew that, but he sought him out to interview. Filmed in Jordan, not Israel, Carlson titled the episode "The Shocking Reality of the Treatment of Christians in the Holy Land by U.S.-Funded Israel." Boy, that's a mouthful of anti-Semitism. It is filled with innuendo and outright falsehoods, painting an accurate picture of both Jewish and Christian belief. Researcher Dr. David Ornstein noted that Tucker Carlson and his guests served up a hefty dose of inaccuracies and misrepresentations. Carlson allowed Nuam's anti-Jewish statements to go unchallenged, and at times seemed to encourage him toward ever more inflammatory claims about Israeli Jews. Together, they falsely asserted that Jews, not radical Islamists, are responsible for the declining Christian presence in the region and have made life less welcoming for Christians in Israel. I would argue that Tucker Carlson is 100 times worse than Father Coughlin. 100 times worse. He's used all the modern techniques of communication, of travel, of the ability to spread thoughts and comments worldwide, in a nanosecond he's used it all strategically to trash Jews, to trash Christians, and I would argue to trash President Trump's foreign policy, because that's what he's really attacking, President Trump's foreign policy, the Jewish people, Christian people, and it just so happens he's promoting the best interests and propaganda of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, and their ilk. Carlson inaccurately portrayed Israel's Christians as persecuted and impoverished. In fact, Israel's small Christian population is well established and among the country's most educated and economically successful communities. You can go online, one Christian after another, one Christian mayor after another, one Christian leader after another, all say the same thing, that they are Israeli citizens, that they are proud, and many of them have been in the IDF, are in the IDF, have children in the IDF. Carlson also falsely claimed that Israel bombed Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza in 2023. In reality, as we all know, a misfired rocket launched by the terror group Islamic Jihad struck the hospital. He alleged that Israeli Jews set fire to the Tabith Church near Ramallah. The fire was set by local Arab Muslims. And by the way, a lot of churches are burning all over the world now since this mass migration of Muslims, but mostly the Islamists all over the world. Throughout, Carlson depicts Jews as sadistic, racists, American Christian Zionists, as credulous dupes manipulated by sinister Jewish interests, and consistently glosses over Arab terrorism and violence. I haven't heard him say much about the Iranian people, the Persian people who are being slaughtered by that Islamist regime. Have you? No, platforming Holocaust revisionists, neo-Nazis, and other extremists isn't merely asking questions. Carlson frequently demands hosting extremist figures by claiming he's simply asking questions. But providing a platform for hate often directed at Jews and Israel is provocation, not legitimate inquiry. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a propagandist. That's what he's a manipulator. 2025, Carlson hosted avowed neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, who used the appearance to claim that Hitler and Stalin were great leaders, that American Jews run the country, and that organized Jewry manipulates non-Jews. In 2024, he hosted revisionist historian Darrell Cooper, who argued that Churchill, not Hitler, Churchill, was the chief villain of World War II, and that the Nazis did not intend to kill the Jews. Carlson praised Cooper as, quote, the best and most honest popular historian in America, unquote. In 2025, he hosted American nun and radical Islam apologist Mother Agapaya Stephanopoulos, yes, Georgie's sister, and did not challenge her false claim that Israel planned to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Israel actually protects them with their own police and IDF. By giving extremists a massive platform and mainstreaming their conspiracy theories, Carlson is making anti-Semitism and its ideas respectable again. And it goes on. So let us spend a few minutes and discuss some of this. Why isn't Tucker Carlson being condemned by many of our leaders we love, including and especially in the Republican Party? Why is Tucker Carlson at the White House? Unless he's summoned there to be berated. But why is he at the White House? Number 3, why does he have friends at the White House? Isolationist friends as well. Friends who are undermining our military, undermining the commander-in-chief as I speak. Number 4, why during the height of the massacring taking place in Iran, which continues to this day, was that Islamist Nazi regime playing clips from Tucker Carlson's programming as propaganda? Why? Number 5, Tucker Carlson says that he's going to build a home in Qatar. The Qatari government has to approve that. Why is he so close? Not just to the government of Qatar, but the emir and the prime minister of Qatar. What's in it for him? What's in it for them? Well, we can tell at least in part. Does he not mimic and spew the Qatari line when it comes to Israel? In fact, when it comes to the United States? When it comes to Jews and Christians? Number 6, why has Carlson said virtually nothing, if not nothing, about the Christians being slaughtered by Islamists in Africa, being slaughtered by Islamists in the Middle East, being held as indentured servants, slaves, in Qatar, and in other monarchical countries and dictatorships in the Middle East? Why virtually nothing at all about Christians? Why is, number 7, why is Tucker Carlson actively covering up the plight of Christians in the Middle East and in Arab countries like Qatar? Actively covering up. And there's more questions to be asked about Tucker Carlson. Why isn't he registered as a foreign agent? You know, this guy used to say, why aren't I registered as a foreign agent? Well, why would I be registered as a foreign agent? I don't represent the state of Israel. I give my opinions about what I believe. And my opinions have been the same throughout my entire life and career. Whether it's Israel, whether it's Islam, whether it's terrorism, whether it's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran since the so-called revolution in 1979, my opinions have been the same about my love for my faith, my love of my Christian brothers and sisters. I was among the first to speak out against the slaughter of Christians throughout Africa, the enslavement of Christians, the rape and pillaging of Christians in the Congo, in the Sudan, in Nigeria, by the Chinese communist regime. Consistent every step of the way. He sort of seems like a foreign agent to me, and yet he runs around pretending he's Mr. America, that he defends America, that he supports America. He trashes America. He trashes our country. He's trying to divide us. That's what our enemies want, whether they're communists or Islamists or whatever the hell they are. The reason he's quoted, the reason he has access to these leaders is because they like him, because they view him as a useful idiot. That's why. This has a lot to do with American history. It has a lot to do with our 250th anniversary of our founding, the celebration of our country. What do we stand for? And who are we? And so while I'll continue to talk about our history, great patriots and heroes in our history, as well as loathsome traitors and betrayers in our history, I'm going to tie that to events that are taking place right now, because we have knowledge, we have experience as a people, and this is a beacon to us, a beacon of information that we should take very, very seriously. We are on the precipice of militarily, I believe, addressing, after half a century, a regime in Iran that has killed 1,000 Americans, soldiers and civilians, that has tried to assassinate our president, that is continuously obsessed with getting nuclear warheads and putting them on ICBMs that can now reach our country, to blow our cities off the face of the earth. They slaughtered 50,000 of their own people. They'd slaughter 1 million of their own people if it meant retaining power. That's not a government of a country. Those are terrorists that control a country. It is a police state that's slaughtering its own people to stay in power so it can slaughter us. It believes, as the 7th century primitive barbarians believed, that they must destroy civilization. They believe today that they must destroy the West. Most prominently, the United States of America. Those nuclear ICBMs aren't aimed for Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. They're aimed for New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and everywhere in between and around the United States of America. They're working closely with the Communist Chinese, Putin, and North Korea. And we are on the precipice, I believe, of finally addressing this so that we can have peace and security and prosperity. We haven't bothered that regime. That regime has been kidnapping, slaughtering, maiming Americans since day one. It seeks a nuclear weapon to destroy us. And any terrorist group that runs a country that murders 50,000 of its own people and would murder 1 million of its own people will have no hesitation about firing nuclear warheads against us. And we must not leave it to our children and grandchildren. Because if we do, they'll have tens of thousands of ballistic missiles, much more advanced technology to reach every corner of our country, with warheads that can do massive devastation. And what will our children and grandchildren do then? Our generation has an obligation, like generations past have had obligations to us, to take care of this once and for all. This isn't about warmongering. It's about peace-loving. I'll see you next time on Liberty's Voice.